Okay, thank you. The committee meeting is now in public session and will be recorded and published on the Assembly website. So if we move then to item number 2, which is the RHI Bill ECHR Windsor Framework Memorandum Written Briefing. Following the judgment, Assembly Legal Services generates memorandum for each bill, which will advise committees of the interaction, if any, with the European Convention of Human Rights and Article 2.1 of the Windsor Framework. The committee will now consider the relevant memorandum. You'll wish to refer members to the clerk's cover note at page 4 and the memorandum at page 18. The memorandum indicates that there are no clauses or provisions of the schedules to the bill which call any particular scrutiny by the committee. So the committee will wish to satisfy itself that any deprivation of controls of the payments are proportionate and strike a fair balance between the general interest of the community and the private interests of the persons who have accredited RHI installations. Peter?
So just our members, so what this is about is the Media House judgment, where a bill was passed and then it was there was a challenge in the courts. And what the courts said was, the Assembly did not give appropriate consideration, was not seen to give appropriate consideration to the interaction with the European Convention on Human Rights and Article 2.1 of the Windsor Framework. So we have now got advice in this memorandum from Assembly Legal Services, basically, as the Chair just said, saying there are no particular clauses or provisions which are called for particular scrutiny, but then all that the committee would need to do, and I think to be fair, and this is where members jump in and tell me I'm wrong, during the committee stage, what you have been doing is trying to assure yourself that any deprivation or controls on the payments are proportionate and strike a fair balance between the general interests, general public interest, and the private interests of those people who have RHI installations. So if you feel that is indeed the case, that the bill does that strikes that fair balance, that is okay. You may wish to indicate that. If you feel otherwise, this is the time to say. So, Chairperson.
Okay, members content? Okay. Okay. Well, I move to item 3, members, which is apologies. So from Patrick Delargy, Gary Middleton.
Probably Kate, I think.
Kate Nicola.
Sorry.
And,
okay, sorry. We just better content just to pause proceedings for a second.
Yeah.
We're not for it.
Have any declarations of interest they wish to make at this stage? If not, then item 5 is chairperson's business. So members, our informal meeting at Sony last week, there's a note of that. Are members content with that? Agreed. Okay. And then I just want to refer members to AQW 38725, where the Minister advised that a business case and regulations are to be developed in order to replace the Northern Ireland Sustainable Energy Programme. Are the members content that we seek information from the Department on that? Thank you.
Do you want me to know? Sorry,
yeah.
It was just to say you've been dealing with well, so the community energy piece. Just so the UK government launched through GB Energy an amount of money to go into community energy throughout the UK. Northern Ireland was given a pot of that money, but it's just to get a clarity. I think if we got the department in just to see what clarity that is actually happening here with that. And actually it'd be useful to have GB Energy to see how it's all going to work together,
Yeah, no, that would be useful. I've struggled even in the local action plans that GB Energy has produced to see any real benefits to Northern Ireland at this stage. Yeah. So I've done a bit of work in a private capacity as an MLA through written questions asking for the engagement piece on that, but to date there hasn't been a huge amount, so I
think we should bring them in.
Yep. Members content?
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, draft minutes and members of page 54. Members content, I sign those as a true and accurate reflection. Yeah. Matters arising. Peter.
Sorry, members, the invitation that we talked about last week to the UN is in fact a scam. It's a clever one, but it is a scam, so regrettably, no all expenses paid trip to New York or anything like it. So it was very cleverly done, but there you go. So I'll be forwarding that then.
Item 8 then, members, is the RHI Closure Non-Domestic Bill, Department for the Economy. The committee will now receive evidence from officials in respect of the bill, and this will be reported by Hansard. Members of the cover note at page 63, the Department's response to closure costs and timeline at page 68, a copy of the draft closure regulations at page 72, a summary of the Department's response to the consultation at page 92, a previous response from the Department to raise queries at page 122, and a previous Department response to regulation making part in the bill at page 129. Welcome back, Alan Smith and Katrina Harkin, to the committee, and hand over to you at this stage, colleagues.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. I have a very brief opening statement.
No problem
I was
at all.
advised brevity was
Yep.
the key. So the purpose of the RHI closure bill is essentially to give the Department the legal tools we need to formally close the scheme, following the Executive's decision earlier in this year to proceed with closure. The bill lets us convert all existing accreditations into closure, move participants onto an annual payments for the rest of their original 20-year term, and step in where an installation no longer meets the eligibility requirements. The bill itself doesn't deal with tariffs or payment levels. That's all picked up in the draft regulations. And as the committee knows, we shared the draft regulations with you, so members have had sight of the detailed framework we intend to implement. Hopefully this was done to support transparency and give the committee the time and space to consider the regulations fully. The regulations set out how closure will actually work. They bring the 2012 scheme to an end and replace quarterly metered payments with an annual payment based on a deemed level of use, using the 2017 to 2019 period as the reference point. They also set out the ongoing obligations for participants, the inspection and compliance arrangements, and what happens in cases of non-compliance. You're aware we made several adjustments after the public consultation. We had 216 responses and people raised important points. As a result, we've expanded the usage declaration model to 4 bands. We've introduced a right of review where that reference period doesn't fairly reflect someone's usage, and we've confirmed that both transfers and relocations of installations will remain possible with appropriate safeguards. On the operational side, Ofgem has agreed to keep administering quarterly payments until the end of June. This extension is really about reducing the likelihood of any gap between the last payment under the current system and the first payment under the new closure arrangements based on the current legislative timeline. It also gives us more time to build out additional system functionality before go live, so we're in a better position operationally when the Department takes over. Hopefully, taken together, the bill and the regulations give us a fair and clear way to close the scheme. I hope that gives the committee a useful overview, and we're of course happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Katrina, and can I thank you, Alan? So, listen, can I thank you on behalf of the committee for your work on this? I think all members are pleased to see we've got to this stage. Just a couple of questions from me. So, firstly, some of the evidence that we had received from stakeholders was in relation to their metering collection. So, is there going to be the flexibility if they wish to provide reliable readings?
So, I think we've been considering this particularly since our last visit to the committee. I think at the last appearance we had sort of went into the difficulties with making metering, writing it into the regulations because there are issues with things like calibration of meters and these kind of things. In terms of the wider evidence base that we're expecting to use in our compliance inspections functions, I think what we're going to do is take a very common sense approach in the guidance. And if that metering evidence is available, if participants are able to supply that, then I do think we will consider that in the round with all the other evidence as we go through that inspection and compliance process. I don't think it's going to come in formally in the regulations.
Sure. Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
And just for clarity, so the executive have approved the draft regulations, isn't that correct?
They approved the closure proposals following, so the draft regulations, the actual document, didn't go to the executive. It was the proposals that informed the regulations.
Okay. So the regulations themselves at this stage haven't?
Yeah.
No. And there's no intention of those going there at this stage?
I don't think so. I don't.
Okay. No problem. And then there's Treasury approval, obviously, is already in place.
Yeah.
So once this is done, and not to think about your next project, but obviously then how do we then ensure then for the next 7 years that the underutilised AMI funding is?
So that obviously, as we're moving towards resolving, I think is the word I'm going to use, RHI, I think that the future use of AMI has sort of drawn more focus in the department. In terms of the specifics of how we're going to utilise that, I think that's still being worked out in other areas of the group. But I think we will be in the position to share more information about our thinking on that shortly.
Okay. And then finally, just for me, so participants, particularly those who took the court action in relation to the previous historic underpayment in their view. So court judgment said that, wasn't it, between 2017 there was in their view that there was disproportionately low payment rate. Obviously, we're not utilising the full AMI at this stage because we're saying that the business case has been approved by Treasury and it's value for money.
Yeah.
So is that the answer to them if they say, well, why have you not looked back at that period where the courts have made clear that the payments have been underutilised?
I think so, Philip.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. Any other colleague have anything? Jonathan?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just briefly, so obviously one of the key issues the committee's been trying to deal with is the overriding trust issue. So
Yes.
first of all, from a trust perspective for us as committee members and indeed the general public, that there's adequate safeguards in place to ensure there's no abuse of the scheme. You've talked about that in some detail, about the metering, inspections, etc., and a degree of flexibility built in to ensure that that's foolproof, which is welcome. On the other side, we had genuine participants who still feel very much a lack of trust that perhaps, and I say it particularly, I'm going to look at Clause 1, Part 6, where it gives us the power. So expressly allows the regulation to be made, or expressly allows regulations to be made from time to time to alter the scheme until it's closed. Yeah. Could you perhaps talk us through that particular part of Clause 1 and demonstrate how those genuine participants can have faith that we don't see a repeat of the past whereby there's litigation between participants in the department because the department alters the scheme in their view, which is counterproductive to the spirit of the scheme and their genuine participation.
Yeah. Absolutely, Jonathan, and I think it's a good point, well made. In terms of the powers in the bill as they stand at the minute, they're sort of two sides to it. We do need those powers to make the changes we're proposing in these regulations. I think the last time we'd been here, I spoke about, I think, Clause 1.6 and 1.7 were two clauses that had been brought to our attention from participants as being potential sort of things that we really want to discuss and make sure that everybody's clear on before we reach closure. 1.6 and 1.7 specifically, we are not intending, there is no plan in the department that we will use those clauses beyond what we're proposing at the minute. What I said the last time and what I still think holds true is based on the lessons learned from the public inquiry and the original development of the scheme. If we find ourselves in the position where something unexpected, unplanned, unforeseen happens in the future, I don't know what that would be. And we are left in a position where we don't have the powers in a primary bill to be able to make any changes. That causes significant difficulties. Where we have balanced that is by making everything draft affirmative. So if we ever did have to come to the point of something, I genuinely don't know what it would be. It's that we don't know what we don't know. But if something unexpected did happen, and there was a reason to come back and change, all of that would be through full scrutiny of the committee and the assembly and in consultation with the participants.
So I think you've pretty much answered the safeguard that I believe that those that were presenting to the committee with concerns, because it's drafted in draft affirmative, if there was any need to use Clause 1.6 or 1.7 to alter the scheme, there would be a formal vote in the assembly on that particular change.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
And committee, obviously, in the first.
Yes.
Okay, David.
No, come here.
Just to tease out, one of the bit of evidence we got, and it was repeated actually several times from users, was they actually want to give us more evidence. They want to give us more because they feel like give that surety and that there is nothing untoward going on and kind of put that to bed. So you've talked there about you will take that evidence. Would you talk that through, just what that will look like for a person?
In terms of the operational side and in the IT system, and I think we had spoken about this the last time, David. So we have a time, because of the Ofgem extension, the legislative timeline, we have slightly more time to build out the functionality, but the IT system will very much be about the annual declarations and issuing payments. When I'm talking about the wider evidence base, I see that more on the compliance and the inspections front. So if there's a routine inspection, if there's an inspection happening of property, I would expect the inspector to be looking through the evidence provided. The wider compliance and the desk-based audits is where I think that evidence will really come into play. The exact processes of that I don't have yet. That'll be in the guidance, so I don't want to mislead at the minute and say, we have all the details of the exact operational back and forth between participants and the department worked out. There are guidance documents under development, and more than happy to share them whenever we get them. But I do think, and I don't like to repeat it, I do think what we're trying for here is a really measured, common sense approach to these things without overwhelming participants with, maybe unreachable evidence requirements. If we say everybody needs to provide, you have to hold your meter readings and calibrate, we know that's not going to happen. These meters are sensitive pieces of equipment, and a lot of them are 13 years old at this stage, while at the same time balancing the protection of the public purse. So, more than happy to come back whenever we have our guidance.
I think that would be useful. The band and the way the extra band is really welcome. I really do. I think that's something that we picked up on. And those changes and make it, and it has to be flexible, but it's just that reassurance. It's whenever the users are saying, we want to give you the evidence, I think we should take that evidence whenever it's available,
Absolutely, and I do think even that conversation speaks to the improving relationship between the department and the participants. I don't feel I don't feel that we're in the same conflict that we may have been a number of years ago. So absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thank you, David. Sinead?
Just a small one, Katrina. The department has said that it's going to monitor the impact of closure on rural groups. Is that just through the normal processes, or?
That'll be just through the normal processes. I think it would be. It's very clear to everybody that RHI has a disproportionate impact on rural communities just by the nature of the scheme. But I think even wider than RHI, Sinead, I think on our future planning, as Phil was saying, for the future use of EMA, the needs of rural communities really is going to have to be to the forefront of that. But it will be through the normal monitoring and ongoing engagement with participant representatives.
Okay.
Yeah.
EQIAs.
Yes,
Okay, that's great.
Thank you, Sinead. Diana?
Yeah, thank you. It's good to see you again. Just a question that's a bit like Sinead there. It's the future review mechanism. Can you talk us through how that is going to be rolled out?
Are you talking about the? Sorry, Dan.
So whether you're reviewing the ongoing, the implementation and the rollout.
Yeah.
What plans have you for reviewing that? Should you need then to halt at times and change?
In my view, and this may be very simplistic, I am sort of envisioning in 2 or 3 years' time that the future of RHI will settle down into a very steady cycle of payments. What will happen and what has been happening continually in the department since I think day one of RHI is we have to keep an eye on the fuel price differentials, because I can't foresee it. I think the tariffs as they sit at the minute are correct. I think these are the right tariffs. I think they bring parity to our participants as opposed to those in Britain. But if something unexpected happened in that front, that may be something that we may wish to consider, and I'm sure we would hear from the participants about that. So I think it just is that normal ongoing monitoring of a scheme. But I do hope that the proposals we're bringing will see sort of a very soft see out of the RHI scheme, because I think it has been quite difficult for a lot of people.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Colleagues, if there are no other questions at this stage.
No.
Okay. Members then content for the committee to move informal clause by clause consideration of the bill?
Agreed.
So we're now asked to set out their informal views on the clauses and amendments, if any, to the bill for the record. No votes will be taken. Formal clause by clause consideration will follow next week, when votes may or may not be required. Members are clear to proceed. Wish to follow this using the bill evidence table from page 6 of their packs, if members want to open those up. So let's now deal with clause 1.1 to clause 1.2 of page 6. These provisions are described as scene setting. No commentary was received on them, and the department has nothing to add at this stage. No problem. No evidence was received on this clause, and no amendments were proposed. Can members confirm they understand this part of the clause?
Yeah.
Members indicate formally they wish to oppose or support the proposition where this part of the clause stands part of the bill. Members content stands part of the bill.
Yeah.
Agreed? Okay. Let's deal now with clause 1.3 to 1.5 and 1.12 at page 7. This part of the clause allows the Department to bring regulations to partially or completely close the non-domestic RHI scheme. The Department previously clarified the provision 1.5, which allows for the conferring of functions on other persons will likely be used in respect of the inspection and compliance regime. Does the Department have anything to add at this stage? No problem. Members confirm they are understanding of this part of the clause. They are. Are members happy to indicate informally that we support this proposition, that this part of the clause stands part of the bill? Members are content. Okay, if we now deal with clause 1.6 at pages 8 to 9. This part of the clause allows the Department to bring regulations to revoke the 2012 regulations in support of scheme closure and to allow for these of historic data to calculate tariffs. UFU and RANI expressed concern at the wide-ranging natures of these powers. The Department has clarified that these powers were developed in response to the RHI inquiry findings and that in any event they would be subject to both committee and assembly approval. The Department have anything to add at this stage? No. Members content they understand this part of the clause? Yep. Okay. Members content to indicate informally that we will oppose this proposition. We will support this proposition and this part of the clause stand part of the bill. Okay. We'll now deal with 1.7 at page 10 to 13. This part of the clause allows the Department to bring regulations to allow for one-off periodical or instalment payments and for payments to be calculated on the basis of deemed or notional generations of heat. UFU and RANI wanted payments to be grandfathered. They also sought backdated payments for the period 2019 to the present and for there to be controls to prevent changes to bandings. They also sought an upfront indication of payment and appeals process and for the continued use of metering where available to support claims and for participants on the zero band to be able to remain within the scheme. The Department advised that the tariffs would not be altered except with the agreement of the Assembly. An appeal process would be in place which may allow for the use of 2018 data and that zero banding participants could remain within the scheme. The Department has now responded in relation to the issue of metering. Do you have anything you want to add at this stage, colleagues? No? Okay. Members confirm that they understand this part of the clause. They do. Are members content to indicate informally that we oppose the proposition? I'm testing that people are listening. That we support the proposition to this part of the clause stand part of the bill. Are members agreed?
Yeah.
Clause 1.8 to 1.13 at page 14. This is described as being technical in nature and drew no comments for stakeholders. The Department has nothing to add at this stage. Members understand this part of the bill and we support the proposition informally.
Great.
Okay, thank you. We'll now deal with clause 1.10 to 1.11 at page 15 to 16. This part of the clause allows the Department to bring regulations to allow for events that have occurred prior to the coming into operation of the bill. The Department advised that this is to cover payments made between the end of the current scheme and the start of the closure scheme. The Department has nothing to add at this stage. Members are understanding of this clause and we're happy to indicate we support this part of the bill. Members content?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Clause 2 then at page 17. This provides for the Act to come into operation on the day after receiving royal assent. The Department will have nothing to add. I assume members understand what that means, and we're happy to indicate we support this part of the bill. Agreed?
Agreed, members.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, other matters at page 17. UFU wanted to allow for a change of RHI ownership reflecting sale or inheritance of farms. UFU also wanted a further flexibility to allow for RHI equipment pre-notification to transfer to other locations, even when the farm has not been sold. The Department indicated that regulations will allow for change of location for an RHI boiler. The Department hasn't commented on change of RHI ownership owing to sale or inheritance.
Change of ownership is allowed under the regulation.
No problem at all. Members understand that, and are members content that we informally support this part of the bill?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Members want to indicate formally if they wish to seek or add amendments to the bill or seek assurances from the Minister on any item. No? Okay. With that then, members, thank you for that, and can I thank officials for all your work on that. The committee will definitely support the bill, but from my perspective, can I encourage the Energy Department to get on with looking at now how we're going to utilise the remainder of that, Amy?
Yeah.
We have legal targets that we need to meet by 2030, and underspending that amount of money at a time of strained public finances shouldn't continue indefinitely. Okay. Are members content we write to the department?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
I don't think Dr. Thompson is with us, so if we step on to item 10, members are content.
It's just like a wee cough or just
Okay, item 10, Spring Supplementary Estimates, Departmental written briefing. The Assembly provides legal authority for the Executive spending. It does through the main estimates and the Spring Supplementary Estimates. On the 23rd of February 2026, the Assembly will consider the supply resolution for the Northern Ireland Spring Supplementary Estimates. The supply resolution is how the Assembly provides approval for Spring Supplementary Estimates. The Committee is asked to consider a written briefing provided by the Department in respect of the SSEs. Refer members to page 243. Do members have any questions at this point? If not, members content to note the written paper.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 11 then. SL1, the employment rights increase of limits. I refer members to the Senior Assistant Clerk's cover note at page 278. The Department proposes to lay a statutory rule entitled the Employment Rights Increase of Limits Order Northern Ireland 2026. The proposed rule is not subject to any procedure in the Assembly. The rule will come into operation on the 6th of April 2025. The rule revises the limits on awards and payments under certain employment rights legislation in line with RTI. This includes provision concerning the limit on a week's pay used in calculation of statutory redundancy payments, the basic award of compensation made by an industrial tribunal for unfair dismissal, the limit on guaranteed payments when workers are not provided with work, and the basic award for unfair dismissal in health and safety cases. The Department previously advised in February 2024 that Northern Ireland diverged from Great Britain somewhat in respect of these payments, and that an options paper regarding the restoration of parity was to be prepared for future ministerial consideration. This proposed rule does not address this issue at this stage. Do members have any concerns or questions at this stage? Okay. Are members content that we write to the Department seeking restoration of parity with GB on this issue? Okay.
Yeah.
And are members agreed to issue a call for evidence of views using citizen space and publish the SL1, the proposed draft statutory rule, and any relevant document from the Department on the Committee's website? Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. I advise members that in line with new delegated legislation process, the Committee will turn to this matter in a couple of weeks. Then move on to
Correspondence.
Pardon?
No, I don't think she's there yet.
Yeah, correspondence. Okay, item 2, at page 293, is to note ministerial correspondence advising of HSE Northern Ireland consultation to remove 10 items of health and safety legislation. Committee content to note.
Yeah.
Item 3, again for noting, is a ministerial response in respect of Go Succeed. The Department is to provide $2.53 million for Go Succeed. The Executive continues its work with the UK Government on the Local Growth Fund. I think it's important that on this one that we thank the Minister for her work in relation to Go Succeed. I know that she had engaged with councils and providers across Northern Ireland in relation to this loss and the important work that funding does. So and a rare act of generosity. I want to pay tribute to the Minister for her work on this issue.
Chair, and I would concur with that. Would it be possible for us to get a briefing with Go Succeed? It's just I'm always conscious, I'm sure other members of the same, we're continually liaising with our council and what support is there for local business, and they're directed down that route. It would be nice to hear just some of their work, if it was possible and could be fitted in any way.
Is that agreed, Chairperson?
Yeah.
Are members also content that we formally write to the Minister thanking her for her work on this? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll then move to item 4. Is at page 347. Members are asked to note a departmental response in respect of Northern Ireland Reval 2026. Members content to note? Okay. Item 5 at page 350. Members are asked to note departmental response in respect of reported job losses at Linden Food, setting out Invest NI's response. Members content to note? Okay. Item 6, members are asked to note a copy of the correspondence from the Committee of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to the Economy Minister in respect for support for the ABP food group. Committee content to note? Okay. Item 7, members are asked to note a departmental response in respect of compromised payments in tourism Northern Ireland annual report. The payment of £21,130 was made to 5 staff members who had raised a collective grievance due to unpaid managed costs. Members content to note? Great. Okay. Item 8, members are asked to note South West College annual report. Members content to note?
Yeah.
Okay. Item 9, members are asked to note a departmental briefing paper on a visit to a skills and life work provider impact training. Members content to note. Item 10, members are asked to note the Youth Assembly monthly update. Members content to note.
Great.
Yeah.
Members are asked to note and to hold a date for Advice NI Sustainable Energy Communities taking place on the Monday the 8th of June in the Long Gallery. Members content to note. Members, any queries in relation to that? No? Forward work?
So, members, just to confirm, 25th of February we will have Hospitality Ulster, Hotels Federation and Food to Go who will come along to talk about the economic impact of Reval. The Department has confirmed it will come along on the 4th of March to talk about the higher education financial needs assessments. I'm showing there a budget briefing on the 4th of March. I'm not sure if we're getting that. I think discussions continue. So as members are also aware, we have an external meeting, 11th of March, McGee campus. We're then going to visit Seagate. They've confirmed, the Department has confirmed that it will come and talk to us about the enhanced investment zone on that date, but they haven't yet confirmed on LIPIF, which is the Local Innovation Partnership Fund, so we're still pushing them on that one. And then in respect of, yes, the universities, okay, it's highly unlikely we're going to get that for the 18th of March. We're still talking to UCAS and CAO. UCAS are not actually, they tell us, responsible for the timing of results. That comes from the examination boards, so they don't control that. So it's therefore impossible for them to coordinate with CAO. But we're having a further chat with them. They've actually written to us. We're trying to get something in writing out of I think we have got something right out of CAO. So we'll put that all together next week. We'll come back to you. We'll try and get something on this because I know it's an important issue, but it's just who do we speak to on that one. In terms of the CSTA, who's the Chief Scientific Technology Advisor, she's actually confirmed for the 22nd of April on the public sector AI strategy. And then, the Department has now confirmed that they will come on the 22nd of April to talk about the regional balance. So there we go. So that's what we have. If the committee are content, obviously I'm going to add something for Go Succeed as well. So if the committee are content with the forward work programme as it is, or if they have anything else to add.
Great. Okay. Is there any other business members wish to raise at this stage?
Can I have the Wi-Fi password?
Okay, members content then we just break until Dr. Wilson arrives?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Dr. Lisa Wilson, one of the Minister's critical friends, and she's going to give us an overview on a research paper entitled Trade Union Voice as a Lever for Good Jobs, Evidence, Policy and Practice in Northern Ireland. Dr. Wilson, you're very welcome here today, and thank you for your ongoing work in relation to supporting economic activity here in Northern Ireland, and I'm happy to hand over to you at this stage if you are content.
Hiya, and Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear today. And as you said, I'm here following the committee's decision to consider the research paper on employee voice shared by the Department for Economy. I'm a senior economist at the Nevin Economic Research Institute, an independent think tank funded by trade unions affiliated with Irish Congress of Trade Union. And I'm also one of 4 critical friends to the Minister for Economy, advising on the good jobs pillar of the Department's economic vision. The committee's purpose is to deepen its understanding of workers' voice and employee representation ahead of the introduction of the Good Jobs Bill. The Department's Good Jobs agenda draws on the Carnegie UK Trust framework and recognises that job quality extends beyond employment to include work characteristics that support well-being and productivity. Job quality is understood across 7 dimensions, and this paper that you're considering focuses on the voice and representation dimension, and it builds on earlier work commissioned by the LRA. This paper responds to business requests to better understand the evidence base behind policy developments in this area, and it draws on international research and employee voice, industrial relations and labour market institution. Its purpose was to try and synthesise the high quality research, not to advance new empirical findings. So leading international institutions reached consistent conclusions on trade union voice as the same as these paper. The OECD notes its role in fair wages and productivity sharing. The IMF highlights macro stabilisation effects, and Eurofound shows that negotiated agreements often improve job quality above legal minimums. Within the UK, a similar academic evidence base has informed policy integration of these issues into policy. Wales has placed social partnership on a statutory footing. Scotland embeds collective bargaining, worker voice in a fair work framework, and the new Employment Rights Act in England strengthens trade union access, recognition and protections. So what the paper does is tries to explain the concept of worker voice and draw out why trade union voice is a different and qualitatively different form of voice than other forms of voice which exist in the workplace, and also then to draw out the evidence of the effects of worker voice and representation via trade unions on job quality outcomes and on business outcomes, particularly in productivity. So the first form of voice that employee voice refers to the ways, I suppose, where workers express or raise concerns and influence decisions that affect their working lives. It can be individual or collective, formal or informal, management-led or worker-led. These distinctions matter because different forms of voice have very different implications for power, effectiveness and outcomes. So the first form of voice that exists in the workplace is individual direct voice, such as one-to-one discussions, open door policies. These mechanisms can be useful and are valuable, but the evidence is clear that individual bargaining power is not realistic for many workers. The OECD note that power asymmetries, information gap and fear of reprisal limit the effectiveness of individual voice, particularly in low-paid and insecure jobs. And comparative research between Britain and France shows that where collective voice is strong, workers are less likely to exit employment. And whereas reliance on individual voice alone in Britain is associated with higher quit rates. The Taylor Review emphasises that meaningful voice depends not only on the existence of formal mechanisms, but also on management capability and organisational culture. The Taylor Review notes that while conduct in the majority of workplaces, respectful dialogue and civil conduct is taken for granted, the review does highlight persistent weaknesses in leadership and management capability across the UK. These deficits the Taylor Review links to broader patterns of disengagement and decline in autonomy at work. Recent evidence for Northern Ireland from the Skills and Employment Survey shows that there is concerns and highlights the limits of management-led voice in Northern Ireland. Around 1 in 4 workers in Northern Ireland report that their manager provides little or no help when they are under pressure. Variations in support are low and most pronounced in relation to managers helping employees to do their jobs better and recognising their abilities, with particularly low levels reported among men, those working in male-dominated roles, younger workers and workers who report poor health or limiting ill health conditions. And only 37% of private sector workers in Northern Ireland strongly agree that their manager respects them as a person, compared to 45% across the UK. The second form of voice which exists in the workplace is non-union employee representation forums, such as staff councils, joint consultative committees, where employees elect or appoint representatives to raise issues collectively with management. The academic literature recognises that these arrangements can have genuine strengths. Where they function well, they can widen participation, improve communication and build trust. These mechanisms have been shown to be able to operate at speed and flexibility because they are embedded within managerial structures. Committees can meet regularly, respond quickly to operational issues and facilitate engagement on day-to-day matters. However, the core finding of the broader literature is that these strengths are tightly constrained by a lack of independence. Unlike trade unions, non-union representative bodies typically exist only with managerial permission. Their mandates, their resources, their agendas and even the time representatives have to operate are often determined by management. They are employer-funded and operate within management-defined boundaries, meaning that employees may be present but the conditions under which they speak are confined and constricted. This dependency is reinforced by the fact that many non-union representative bodies are issue-specific and discretionary rather than enduring institutions with general authority, and they can be created, repurposed or withdrawn as organisational priorities change. As a result, they are fragile and lack durability, and researchers have warned that this can lead to the concept of pseudo-voice, where consultations exist but not in substance, where employee participation does not translate into real influence. And again, empirical evidence for Northern Ireland supports this concern. The UK Skills and Employment Survey shows that we've reached the highest level, I suppose, in terms of the prevalence of consultative structures employees perceive of consultative structures. By 2024, although 74% of UK employees reported that consultative committees exist, only 28% felt that they had a genuine influence over decisions affecting their work. This gap the literature describes as a growing voice gap. Northern Ireland doesn't have the long-term trend because we didn't participate in the Skills and Employment Survey over the time, but we have the recent survey data for 2022, and it shows that around 60% of employees in Northern Ireland reported that managers arranged consultative committees, compared with 68% in the UK. And around 1 in 5 worked in workplaces that took part in like quality circles where they, had think groups on particular issues. However, when asked how much they say workers had over decisions affecting how they did their jobs, workers in Northern Ireland reported lower levels of participation and higher feelings of exclusion than the UK. The third area is state regulation and statutory rights. So statutory mechanisms or rights, including, for example, the minimum wage, working time, health and safety, dismissal protections, information and consultation rights. These set minimal enforceable standards, and they are an important mechanism to give workers voice through giving them rights. They're unilateral, reactive, and they provide rights without representation. Their effectiveness heavily depends on individual enforcement and often limited from a worker's point of view, by fear of retaliation or the complexity and the risk of legal processes. And the OECD warns that systems relying heavily on regulations to deliver industrial relations risk a governance deficit, and regulation cannot fully replace the coordination and information flows and problem-solving capacity generated through industrial relations. The final form of voice then is indirect voice through independent trade unions. Trade unions provide structured, collective and independent mechanisms for employee voice, combining representation with institutional authority, and their effectiveness rests on 4 dimensions: their independence, their authority, their legitimacy and their enforceability. So unions are member funded and governed, allowing articulations of concern with recognised backing. They're enforceable through the statutory protections afforded to engagement in trade union activities. They gain legitimacy and authority through the fact that workers choose to have a trade union and choose to be involved within a trade union. And so they provide credible, accountable channels for negotiation, especially where individual voice is constrained. The Skills and Employment Survey, again, shows continued relevance in Northern Ireland. Union density is highest in the UK, with 1 in 3 workers a member of a trade union. Union presence in workplace is 50%, and collective bargaining coverage is at 46.8%. Private sector presence is at 27%, and coverage is at 21%. So we often hear the trade union density is amongst the highest of all the UK regions. That is true, but it's not the case across when we look at trade union presence in the workplace, nor at collective bargaining, particularly in the private sector. Within the private sector, we have lower levels than the UK average of trade union presence in the workplace, and also lower levels of collective bargaining within the workplace within the private sector. But latent demand remains strong. So 37% of workers who were asked would they vote, if a vote took place, would they vote to establish a union in the workplace, and 37% said yes. When asked in firms where there was a union in the workplace, 74% of workers said that they would vote to maintain it, and 5% that they would vote to get rid of it. Trade union voice complements managerial and statutory voice. Its qualitative voice lies in independence, democratic function and capacity to influence outcomes. I'm conscious of time, so in terms of the paper, I'm not going to go into the detail in the opening statement in terms of the effects of trade union voice on the particular outcomes, such as pay, terms and conditions or productivity, but I'm happy to pick this up in the question. But finally, I suppose over recent months, I have been in dialogue with business organisations, individual employers, trade unions and workers with the purposes of communicating the policy proposals set out in the Department's Way Forward document, and critically to listen to how these proposals are heard, are understood and received by the different stakeholders. I have done this because I thought, as I have been advising the Minister, it is crucial not to alongside the academic expertise that I can provide, it's crucial that I understand what has been said on the ground in terms of how these issues are being understood. and emerging. So one clear theme emerging from these discussions is apprehension among some business representative bodies, and particularly from within parts of the manufacturing sector, in relation to the proposals to strengthen trade union voice and representations. These engagements have focused on identifying and unpacking areas of misunderstanding or uncertainty about the proposals and what they would and would not require in practice. But I have to be clear that this negative positioning is not whole-scale across all businesses or all sectors. And what I have found is that there is a significant knowledge gaps in terms of the purpose of trade union voice and why it is different from other forms of voice, and also that the negativity appears to be most strongly coming from those where there is no union involvement currently. This coincides with and this negative view that trade unions are inherently conflictual or adversarial in nature. And this coincides with a 2022 CIPD report. So where there is trade union involvement in the workplace, as I've engaged with businesses, and notwithstanding, they don't all have, singing songs of grace about their engagement with trade unions. It's industrial relations, things do get tricky from time to time. But whenever I press them on, well, would you get rid of the union? It is often the case, no, they recognise the role and the value of trade unions. And the CIPD survey, which engaged with HR professionals, found that 59% of respondents agree that working in partnership with trade unions benefits their organisations, and 60% of respondents with recognised trade unions describe their management-union relationship as positive, and 42% said that trade unions were constructive actors during organisational change. Where concern does it exist, and this I'll finish on this, it exists around 5 broad areas. First, there are claims relating to instances of poor or adversarial behaviour by some trade union representatives. Second, there is a perception that trade union presence can foster a them and us culture within workplaces. Third, there are concerns that stronger trade union voice and representation may reduce business agility, particularly in relation to organisational change. Fourth is that the proposals will give trade unions unfettered access to the workplace at any times by any means, and this will be wholly disruptive to business. And fifth is the more fundamental ideological objection or unitarist view of the firm in which trade unions are seen as unnecessary or third party and irrelevant to the working relationships. On the poor adversarial behaviour, to be fair, I've heard this from both sides, workers and businesses, and I don't think anybody right-mindedly would say that bad behaviour from anyone is appropriate or condonable. But I think that we need to learn from the experience from New Zealand prior to their introduction of their New Zealand Employment Rights Act, where they told tales of similar woe, and it was the very introduction of strengthened trade union rights which prompted a change in the industrial relations framework and a new direction of travel. The system is developed around the concept of good faith, and we can come back to that. In terms of them and us, the proposals in around trade union access rights are not to mandate trade union state conscription, but rather to promote and give workers genuine choice over their voice. I've been to numerous firms where there appears to be high levels of engagement and positive relationships with workers and employers and management, and I've been explaining to them that trade union access rights does not mandate the trade union representation of the workers is now in a collective agreement, or now that they have to negotiate wages with the or terms and conditions with the employer, that access rights are different from recognition or negotiation rights. But it remains that there is an unmet demand evident from the research on trade union representation. And it would be amiss also not to give credence to the idea that there's an inherent plurality of interests in the relationship. This is not created by the existence of trade unions. Even the most benevolent employers sometimes cannot see the employee point of view through no fault of their own. This is recognised across the scale from businesses, who many of which are operate in practice such as high performance management practice, because they recognise that engagement and discussion and voice and hearing from workers is important. But these proposals are therefore not about mandate and unionisation, they're about choice. Trade unions will remain part of the labour market. Some businesses are not happy with the manner in which trade unions go about their business, But much of what trade unions say in this regard is that what they want is, from the proposed changes, is to enable a more positive and constructive relationship where there is clarity on the role of trade unions and the clarity on how workers access their right to a trade union. The policy question for me is that what relationship we currently have is fragile and is contested at times. And I think the opportunity within the Good Jobs Bill in relation to the strengthening trade unions' right is to put it on a clearer and more constructive footing. And I will leave it there. And thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Wilson. I'll let you take a drink of water.
Yeah,
there.
Sorry, my voice. I've been having a sinus infection for the past few weeks, so my voice is dodgy at the best of times.
That was very useful. So firstly, thank you very much for doing that. I suppose you probably agree with my statement. It's meant to be uncontroversial. Is that this theme that you're advising the minister on is the most controversial of the Employment Rights Bill? That'd be your view?
Yeah, without doubt. Yeah.
So I was just wondering, since the minister set out her way forward proposals, which for some people was finally a policy decision or a statement of intent, because when the original consultation took place, there wasn't really a policy intent in relation to your theme. So you talked about some of the engagement that you've had with business organisations and with individual businesses. So this could be wrong, so it's hearsay, so I wasn't there. So I've been given reports that some of the events that you had been in attendance at, particularly in Mid-Ulster around manufacturing, was pretty unanimous opposition to the proposals that had been mooted, and that it was a difficult meeting, but fair play to those who done it. So I'm just wondering, given that level of objection on that side that we're hearing, has there been any business organisations or companies that have publicly come out to say this is a great idea?
I'm not sure in terms of whether or not they've come out publicly or not. I have been engaging with all of the business lobbies.
Yes.
I think right throughout this, and there was an initial hesitancy in and around that. I think that that is partly to be expected. Yeah. That any policy, the strengthened trade union rights, particularly if there is a notion underlying it that the employment relationship is unitarist, and that we do all of this ourselves, kind of thing, and we engage with workers, and that's fine. The meeting in Mid-Ulster was difficult and was challenging insofar as that there was a position that we cannot move forward in terms of this, and those reasons I explained in my opening statement, they tend to be centred around 5 key areas. Mm-hmm. Following that, I thought it was useful for me to start engaging individually with businesses to try and understand in more detail where that was coming from. Mm-hmm. And there is a significant knowledge gap in terms of that piece about the role of trade unions, in terms of what it means. There is a notion that introducing trade union access rights in particular will give unfettered access rights to the workplace, so that the trade union official can arrive in the workplace at any time, at any hour, for any amount of time. I think the Minister has been clear through the targeted consultations that she had, and because it was accepted early on that that this issue needed further consultation, and there was a targeted consultation around the trade union access and trade union rights provisions. These issues were discussed and brought out then, but also in and around the other areas. I think whenever I have been explaining to businesses that this is not trade union conscription, this is giving workers a right to choice, and that the risk that, in this business everything's fine, I engage with employees, relations are good, and there's a fear or apprehension that if you bring in a trade union, that will be disruptive to the business. And I think whenever you explain to them that if that is the case, and there is positive relations here, there will not necessarily be a trade union in this workplace. The choice ultimately remains with the workers, in terms of being able to choose whether or not they want a trade union presence in the workplace. But then, if they wanted to, in larger workplaces, prompt the existing statutory recognition processes. In terms of then of the other areas that they have been raising, is that trade union bad behaviour. This has been a key part of the Cookstown event, or the event in Mid Ulster, was that there has been experiences of trade union bad behaviour. This has been something that, whenever I engage them with individual businesses, has been raised with me. As I said in my open statement, this is not condonable. Whenever I have spoken then, or since that, speak with trade unions about that, they similarly don't think it's condonable. But I think this is why the Minister's intention to align these rights along with a code of conduct on facilitating productive relationship is fundamental to the implementation of this, that there is a set of clear expectations and around the concept of good faith or reasonable behaviour, so that everybody is clear about how people should behave in the workplace, and it's about explaining that. There is in some cases, but we don't want a trade union here. That's not place, and that's an inherent difficulty, because that's a very managerial orientated view of the world, rather than a viewpoint which accepts that an employment relationships is inherently one of power imbalance, and that given individuals rights, or given individuals direct access to an open door policy, the evidence does make clear that this, where people don't feel safe to make these points, that it prompts either organisational silence or individual silence, and also organisational silence, where people put up or shut up kind of a thing. But also that this then leads to things such as absenteeism, turnover, retention issues, where people just go, I'll leave the business and move on because I'm not, being heard, or there's no influence here. These are issues which businesses are raising in terms of, being able to retain staff, being able to attract staff. So there is a genuine need to, to convince them in many respects, and in many respects it was to explain, to talk through this paper in many respects, or talk through the trade unions thinking in terms of bringing forward these proposals, or their position is that this is about trying to align an acceptance that, employee voice matters, but that the qualitative form of that voice also matters.
Sure. So I would get that, but then I was just interested whenever I was reading the paper and it talked about the unmet demand, as you called it, in relation to those workplaces that were ununionised, in terms of how many would want to. So did I read that right, in terms of the Skills and Employment Survey stated that in non-unionised workplaces only 36% of workers would vote to establish a union? Were you surprised at how low that was?
I think it's a fairly high figure. One third of workers that don't have access to voice via trade union would want access to voice. But you can see it from that point of view as well, and I think that would provide some settling to the notion of businesses where, trade unions are just going to go into every workplace now, because it could be getting at the idea that in many workplaces there is no demand for a trade union, and that is fine. But, when 1 in 3 of people are saying something, then it's a fairly significant.
Well, what about the figure then? 1 in 4 who do have unionised workplace would either say that they were opposed to the existing union or were undecided. Would you say that that's a big figure?
1 in 4 saying that they would
either abolish or have no opinion on it.
Well, 1 in 4 are saying that they would vote to abolish a trade union. It's not that it's a significant number of people as well. Like, you know, I don't. There's no way around that. 1 in 4 is a significant.
It's just obviously we have a really difficult balancing act all of this bill, and I think it goes to the crux of the fact that you said there is a knowledge gap. And from my perspective, the knowledge gap came whenever the minister announced their proposals on the bill, but when they did a consultation on the bill, they gave no policy intent or statement. They produced an options paper, and businesses then either went with the worst possible view in their interpretation of where this could go, and then that position, we nearly had a year gap between them when the way forward was set out, and I think views then became really entrenched one way or the other on this, and whatever decision the minister then did in her way forward, no one was going to be happy because there was that huge gap in time for people to, you know, whip up fear that this is what the bill is going to do or this is not. And I think now we're in a situation where people's views on this bill are really, really entrenched. And maybe you can talk to this, but do you think you've changed any business organisations or businesses' mind through this? I just think the process, because there was such a long gap between all of this, that we're not going to get to a consensus on this amongst employees, employers. And
I think because throughout all of the time I was engaging with businesses right through that whole year, whatever, as well.
It made it very difficult for you to how you could engage with them because you had no idea, or maybe you did, and we just didn't, but we had no idea what the minister's views were or what her policy intent was. There was just an options paper.
I think what initially it was around, and this is why I still think I always bring it back to the principle of trade union voice, is that lots of my discussions were then around the principle of trade union voice, not necessarily the policy, you know, option, so to speak. And lots of my engagement focused on that initially. And speaking with various different business lobbies, but also business groups within business lobbies and so on, is that, and even since, is that I would accept that there is a knowledge gap, but there's a knowledge gap in relation to existing, like even in relation to the statutory recognition, existing legislative framework, where, you know, following the Mid-Ulster event, when I engaged with businesses, there was a misunderstanding, for example, on the reducing the point at which you could prompt the statutory recognition process from 21 reducing down to 10 employees, that if you had 10 members of a trade union, that you can prompt the statutory recognition process, or 21 employees. There was a misunderstanding of that. So whenever I went to large companies and I explained, but this change down to 10 won't actually affect you. This is already something that, you know, because you're bigger than 21 employees currently, that there was a misunderstanding that of that proposed legislation. Similarly, I've found that again, in relation to some of the recognition and access pieces, is that there's, because lots of solicitors firms and law firms and GB have been reporting consistently on the GB bill, and I think lots of people have been reading those. Yeah. So there's an assumption that those apply. Sure. So I think my job, and also have been alongside officials, has been trying to explain what the policy proposals are. I very much try to stick to within my remit in terms of the principle of trade union voice, what it is and what the academic evidence is.
And because I'm not clear in terms of where we are then with this proposal, so we were told the bill would be introduced into the Assembly before Christmas. We were then told it would be introduced before the end of January. We're now sitting in February, and the latest answer I got from the Minister was that the bill's drafting will be completed as soon as possible and introduced after that point. So are you aware of, has the drafting of the bill been complete, where it sits, and when we as an Assembly or a committee are able to see it, and ultimately when the public are able to see it? Because
I think probably I know as much as what the Minister said whenever she sat at the Economy Committee a few weeks ago in relation to that. I think there was an intention from her at that stage to provide to the Executive a detailed policy intention ahead of that, to provide some sort of detail in terms of what it would be. I think even that that detailed policy, but via the targeted consultation, for example, in the trade union access bit, was helpful for businesses organisations, because then they got to see what was the, and what was the detailed intentions here. So I think similarly that is useful in terms of providing to the executive. But, I'm not drafting legislation and I'm not a departmental official, so I can't, say anything further than what the Minister had said.
No problem. Sinead?
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for that detail of evidence. And I suppose just I value, first of all, I want to just say that stated, I value trade unions and the work that they do. But I also hear really strong voices within the business community of how they don't feel as if they've been brought along with this. So it's not even the rejection of, it's the fear of, this is like an imposition that they have not been widely really consulted in. And so there is a fear that there isn't enough time. We're told that this will be brought in this mandate, the employment bill, and there's many good aspects on it, and we're concentrating obviously in the employee voice and the representation here in this particular piece, but they don't believe that they're going to have enough time to engage. Even your evidence today just illustrates the complexity of all of this, and that is an absence of actually even seeing the draft bill. So do you think that we have enough time in this mandate? Do you think that there's enough time in the next 13 months to deliver on the expectation of this element of the Employment Rights Bill? Just what's your gut on this?
I do think there's enough time to deliver the bill. Whether or not there's enough time to change the hearts and minds of everybody, I think we really need to look to the experience of New Zealand in relation to that. New Zealand introduced their Employment Rights Act in 2000 following what came before it was the Employment Contracts Act, where there was preceding to the Employment Rights Act and I really encourage the committee through the following months, either through the Department for Economy, who has recordings of sessions from, I call them the New Zealand trio, or the tripart is a business leader from New Zealand, from the main business lobby organisation, from their equivalent of ICTU, and from their equivalent of like the industrial court, who talk through the process and where they have got to. They face many of the same concerns in terms of introducing trade union access rights or trade union strengthened trade union rights within their bill. Tales of similar, we haven't got to grips with this, we haven't been able to bring this along. And I would agree with you that there isn't across the business community and across the business lobbies an outright rejection of this. There is a will to move forward in this in some way. This isn't no across the board in this. And in fairness, what I think the Minister has said on multiple occasions is that this is not going to happen tomorrow, that this will be implemented in a phased way over time, so that the bill can happen, but this will be phased in over time, and that there will be review stages as it happens. But ultimately, this kind of idea that how do we bring businesses along and convince them that this is the right thing to do? I think that is a bit of a difficult thing to do outright. I think one of the business lobby guy was from New Zealand was particularly strong in this, is that you have to you can't tell them, you have to show them in terms of prompting the change of direction. And I think that's the role of an economy minister, but also the Northern Ireland executive, is to say that we have looked at the broader evidence base in terms of trade union voice and representation. We have looked at the positive effects that that it can prompt in terms of job quality and in terms of economic performance, and that we are going to move forward on this, but we will do this slowly in a phased way over time, but also that businesses ask for coordination and want coordination around many different policy areas. So there's a demand for policy coordination or coordination with businesses in relation to skills, for example, in relation to fiscal policy, in relation to infrastructure, and in relation to investment decisions. There's this want for coordination, and I don't think we should accept that but not coordination on industrial relations, because we can see from other economies the benefits which coordinated industrial relations and the benefits of tripartite working can bring. And I'm not talking about necessarily tripartite working at a high level necessarily, but the benefits at workplace level in terms of if you institutionalise a system where workers have genuine choice over accessing that right, and that you can then give to workers their choice of voice within the workplace, that only over time within the workplace, I don't think you can say it will ever be whether it's me or you or anybody in this room or business lobby leaders or trade union leaders that will convince anyone in this. This is about building trust within the workplace at workplace level. But if your only existing mandate or ability currently for trade unions to access these rights is through the trade union arriving at the gate to try and get access to the workers, or through when trade unions can enter the workplaces, such as individual grievances or dismissal issues, or in relation to like redundancies. The system is designed that trade unions only arrive in non-unionised workplaces where there's conflict. And I think if you can implement a system, and this doesn't mean that every workplace will then have trade union presence, because it goes back to that point that unmet demand, and where there is some workplaces just won't want trade union presence in the workplace, and that's fine. But I think we need to really reflect on where the conflictual notion or the adversarial notion of trade unions is coming from, and we can't not do everything forever because of the past. It's trying to find a trajectory forward.
And Lisa, I understand that, and I see so clearly the benefits, because it actually prevents the crisis. And is my issue with this is the time that we have to turn that ship, because I would say every single member of this committee probably hears the voices of those. You always hear the voices of those that don't want something to change higher than those that do. And again, I would go back to the 36% of non-unionised. That's actually quite high, because if there's no issues in your workplace, then you're not thinking unions. But when something happens, everybody thinks about it. Those that are not engaged. But the other thing that I want to ask you about as well, and just how this will work, is the code of practice that the department intends to bring forward, and to produce in consultation with the labour relations agencies and the stakeholders. It obviously won't have any, or will it have any teeth if it's not if there's no statutory obligation to behave within the code of practice, and when will we see it, and will that go parallel, that we can understand, because that's what I'm saying. It's so, this one piece of this employment bill is so complex, and there's so much more of the bill itself, that I'm just afraid that we have such a shortened mandate now that I don't know. I've just finished the mother and babies bill that came forward, and it had 42 clauses, and it took a long time, a committee, to get through in terms of evidence and everything else. And this is so much more complex and bigger and you know, the engagement much wider. I'm just wondering, and so many elements like the code of practice. So if we talk about the code of practice and back again, how does it work? Is it parallel? Because it will inform this piece of the legislation.
So the way that the Minister is committed to moving or trying to follow the New Zealand model in terms of the trade union access, and whilst the code of conduct will come after the bill, or you know, potentially alongside, like running, you know, if this is introduced to the Assembly, the LRA can begin that engagement work. But I can't really begin that until it knows this is happening, if you know what I mean. So that's the issue. I would say, though, that the stakeholders on both sides probably have met more over the past year and a half than, you know, than they ever have or have in a long time, and have been engaging on talking about these issues. In terms of the code of practice and the fears of that sitting, you know, or coming after, the New Zealand piece of legislation includes within the bill, or within their act, the good faith underpinning of it. There's a legislative underpinning to the access rights and to trade union rights more generally, and work industrial relations rights in and around the concept of good faith. And in Cookstown, the Minister made clear to the businesses that access will be on commitment to signing up to a code of conduct, so that these two do go hand in hand. That, you know, that if you don't sign up to a code of conduct, or you know, to the full piece, the code of conduct and productive workplace relationships and a will to have a positive trajectory is fundamental to this.
Right.
And whenever I engage,
you could sign up to a code of conduct and then just go, nah. Not for me, thank you. You know, when something happens, you know, you can make exceptions to anything. So it's just, how do you tie?
In New Zealand, there is like penalties for not, you know, there is penalties in New Zealand for not, you know, signing up to, you know, if you don't adhere to the code of conduct, there's penalties.
Is that the here as well?
Yes, to follow the New Zealand model is that there's penalties if you don't, based on whether or not you don't behave properly or reasonably.
Right. Okay.
Reasonably.
I have a couple of other questions, but I'm going to let it.
And just to finish, in terms of how the committee gets through this, one of my engagements that I had with business lobby recently, and I thought it was an excellent idea, is that how these have happened in the past is that committees have done micro-inquiries where they take lots of evidence in one stage. So I thought it's just something to put in the minds of everybody. There's the way to get through things is perhaps through doing micro-inquiries. So you can take lots of evidence.
Difficulty is we can't do an inquiry into something that we haven't seen. Okay, David.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Coming in again. So I'm starting from the why and then working forward. Okay, so if I start at the why and I look at that, I want to see good jobs, and I want to see protection from employees, and I want to see more opportunities. But I also want to see business excel as well as protecting employees, and I could name in my own constituency loads of businesses where that works really, really well, where business has great communication with their staff. Their staff are the business. I think that's the bit. We sometimes think of this as not being two different things when the staff make up what was the business. So coming from that, I agree with Philip here that the options paper at the start has created has inflated a lot of the problems, because there was a pick and mix that was in front of us, which then everybody went to the worst case scenario, or business went to the worst case scenario. So it's bringing that reassurance to it. One of the things, and I come from a place where I want to see protection for workers, so I'm saying that out. But I remember the committee saying and I said the same question actually to the Federation of Small Business and to the unions, and it was the unions, what engagement have you had? And he said, my door's open. So there's been no proactive go out and actually communicate with business of what this means at a fundamental level. But so that listening to what business concerned, and we'll all have been lobbied, but how can we start to reassure the concerns and start to work through those for that business community?
Like, I have been trying to do the same thing effectively, because I've been hearing similar and explaining to them what it is. I have been moving only on the basis of the New Zealand access model as being the one, and to explain what that is and what that is not, and also to explain what existing rights are, what the proposals are. And I think only through doing that, but with every legislative change afterwards, there comes, in terms of right before its introduction, there becomes an education piece. I have similarly expressed these issues to the department and to the minister, that there is an information gap, there's a knowledge gap, and there has been, an acceptance from department officials that alongside this has to come an educational programme, an information programme that tells them what it is and what it is not. Similarly, whenever I've engaged with, for example, HR professionals within businesses and then like trade union officials, you do hear these like stories and anecdotes on both sides. Totally. And I think there's massive benefit in bringing these people together so they can engage in training together. They can understand the thought processes and the psyche of each side, so they can all recognise and realise that everybody's doing a job and that they've got different roles to play in an industrial relations environment. And I have said to the department that I think it would be worthwhile. So we do lots of management and leadership skills training through like the Skills and Education Division in the department and maybe elsewhere. And then also there is like the department funds like union reps training. And I think what I've suggested to the department is perhaps we need to look at those things in concert and think about how we can utilise some of that funding to educate these people together. But fundamentally, these things go back to the workplace and, how these things happen in the workplace and trust. And I think you can give all of the information ahead of time. You can produce, documents upon documents. And it's, it's through speaking to people in many respects and explaining to them.
Yeah. My concern is that hasn't happened. And what you've said this morning, right, and you said a little bit about you don't have to unionise. I've met with, here we all will have been lobbied from, but I've met in my own, in Langham Valley, several really brilliant employers who aren't unionised but have a brilliant relationship with their workforce. But you said today you don't have to unionise. They don't believe that. So they're coming to me going, we don't want the change. This has like been enforced on them without them understanding of what we're trying to do, and that's the real concern I have. That choice that you've talked about, choice, and you've talked about things, they don't know. And I'm not talking about like small individual. I'm talking about hundreds of employee businesses that just don't. So that piece of educational bit should have already happened. Of what we're trying to do, and with all due respect, and I appreciate you've gone out and you're doing that. One person can't do that. That needs to be, as a department, actually going out and going, these are what we're looking at, really simplistically, and reassuring business of what this will look like for them.
I agree, but I would say that there has been significant levels of like consultation events that would have happened. Yeah. The department officials had, and I think for example the Mid Ulster one arose because of consultation events in like council through NILGA council areas. There has been significant levels of consultation. There has been multiple different events and discussions in and around various different aspects of this. This has been spoke about. I
get that, but the difficulty I have with that is whenever I'm talking on the ground to businesses, they are not aware of it, and that's the bit. The one that you said as well. Just a couple of things just to finish for me, but a couple of things you said about, and you condone the relationship or the actions of the individual. And the behaviour of union. I have heard the same story from multiple businesses, And whenever you say that, I've heard this repeatedly about how somebody's behaviour in the workplace, coming into the workplace. I've had one company that just will not accept them in one so an individual can actually pollute the whole thinking of an entire yeah. So it's concern around that and how I suppose that's the unions to deal with internally, but that reassurance that business needs to be there. And then finally, the last bit for me is you talked about a phased introduction. The one thing that business absolutely wants and needs is security and certainty of what is going to happen in the next period of time. So I'm not saying you don't phase an introduction, but what that would look like is really, how would that look? Because that a business will want to know what's happening when, not just this is all. And I appreciate you don't want everything wouldn't be lumped on in the one go, but it's what that would look like to give a business certainty of this is happening here, what this looks like to me, or how it affects. Yeah, so those are.
I agree. Basically, that explaining that and doing that, and I think going back to the point from Sinead, the code of conduct needs to have teeth. Like I have heard it, but I genuinely also, and I'm sure you all have heard it as well, on the other side in terms of business bad behaviour for workers, and I think to not move forward to a place that. Because the trade unions have been clear right through all of the targeted consultations and all of the consultations that they are committed to a positive direction of travel in this. They're also willing and up for negotiating a code of conduct around reasonable behaviour. And I think not to do that because of a few bad apples on either side would be locking us in to the place that we are now, and I think 100%. Currently we've no way out of that. Currently there's no system that can stop that because we don't have a code of conduct with teeth, for example. And I think we need to try and think, well, what policy levers can we utilise? And in the case of New Zealand, they utilise the concept of good faith to underpin all of this, that access and trade union rights only come through, on both sides, reasonable behaviour.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and I don't mean to tarnish all, because I think there's a trap here that we tarnish all of unions or we tarnish all of business, and that's not that we have some. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. It's a few within in either, and that's the reason. So we've businesses that work really well with the workforce and work with the unions, and we've unions equally that work well. So and that's not exactly not what I'm saying, but it's that code of conduct of where that comes from. And how we get that, which would reassure and take a lot of the reassurance for business. That needs to, everything's will do this. It needs to be up front so people see and understand. Maybe that's the point.
And sorry, Phil, can I just go back?
To move on because we have a wee thing in 15 minutes that we have to do. So, members, I'm going to ask if we can start to direct our questions to the research paper that we're discussing, and I know that members wish to raise wider policy, but we're currently not considering the proposed employment rights bill, and when we do consider that, Dr. Wilson will be an expert and we'll have her here for that, but we are here to discuss her paper, so if you want to tie that in and use some of the figures and facts in her paper, please happily do that, but let's try and refer to what we're discussing here today. Diana.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for being here. And it's really what David is saying. Those are the concerns that come to me. I know we need to refer back to the paper. What engagement have you had with FSB around this? I come from Fermanagh South Road, a lot of very small businesses, and in terms of their expansion plans, they do already operate in very tight margins, and that seems to be the concern of FSB, and the awareness that there is pretty low, and I know that from speaking to businesses. They just don't know. They don't know this is on the horizon. On the point also of implementation phased, I understand. Yes, it's complex, but in a sense, we need to be more definitive in the actions coming from this executive. We seem to be saying from time to time things will change. We will do this in a phased way. Where is, in your opinion, the direction here to safeguard the process? that it is secure.
How do you mean? Sorry.
Well, if things are implemented incrementally, you know, it's how do you build confidence that it's a system? So when it's not finalised, you know, it's incremental. What are we working towards? We know it's fair employment. It's looking after workers' rights. It's doing it in a harmonious way. But is it not better to get to that end point and deliver it as a package rather than, you know, working in an incremental way?
Like, for example, in New Zealand, whenever they introduced their access rights, they didn't do any sort of phased implementation by business size or anything like that, based on the argument that, you know, just because you work in a small business doesn't mean that you shouldn't have access to voice or whatever. So they didn't have any phased implementation. I think where the phased implementation idea comes from is because the Minister and our officials have been engaging with businesses on the ground and have heard fears about a lack of knowledge, or I don't have, you know, in-house IR professionals within here. I don't know how this would work, and how do we implement this? And I think the intention then is to phase it in over time, so that they can learn that it is not going to be wholly disruptive to business, but also that processes in terms of giving structure to it can be worked on, in terms of so that a small business owner can see and can learn from and hear from bigger businesses in terms of how this actually functions in reality. So I think it is, you know, and I have engaged with FSB quite a bit, and I think that they probably would welcome a phase in where, you know, they can learn lessons. But we have seen within the GB Employment Rights Act, similar trade union access rights have been implemented, and FSB in the UK haven't been wholly, you know, critical of that in a public way, and have, you know, accepted and negotiated the Employment Rights Act. So I think that that's an important context, that, you know, this is something that has been implemented or will be implemented in GB as well, and yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
Jen.
you, Gemma.
Thank you, thank you, Lisa. I just have one question because most of the rest of them have been covered. But this kind of isn't related to the research.
No, don't worry. Go ahead.
What are the penalties of not adhering to the Code of Conduct on the New Zealand model?
So it's what they call like a Phase 5 penalty, where it's a monetary penalty, a fine, and it is based on employee size and turnover. So, you know, in terms of the business side, but also on there is a fine for, like, on the trade union side for not adhering to the Code of Conduct.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Gemma and John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And, you know, a lot of the ground has been covered here, and again, the committee can only really deal with what's in front of it in terms of the overall picture. I find myself in agreement with David that, you know, there's
2 days in a row.
There is a huge concern out there with business, and I suppose my concern with that would be that that's only going to grow in time, because there's a lot of them that actually aren't aware of it. Yeah. In fact, major employers that will be coming to you expressing concern because they have people that are employed in their business and are seeing this in the pipeline, you know, they're essentially coming alongside other businesses who have no idea that this is coming, and they're extremely worried about it. And that ties into Sinead's point as well, which is the timing aspect. You know, the Minister herself has been very clear on record that this is going to be fundamental change. This is going to be the largest change in employee-employer relations ever in the history of the state here. That in itself would lead me to think that, you know, there's a lot more work to be done to ensure that the balance is right. And I think particularly in the climate that we face at the moment, like I don't know about other members, but, you know, businesses are facing challenges on every single front right now, and David is right on this point. And I would say there is examples of bad practice, absolutely, but by and large, the vast majority of our employers and employees have a very positive working relationship. And, you know, I agree with you, the perception almost is that where a union's involved, it's problematic. And it shouldn't be like that, and there's many good examples whereby unions have worked proactively with employees to not only defend their rights but also ensure that there's a level of parity. But they're looking at the news day and daily, and they're seeing examples, particularly maybe in the public sector, where there's unionised involvement, it's almost chaotic / grinding the system to a halt. There's record levels of productivity issues within, for example, the civil service and those other public bodies. So that's the backdrop for a lot of them looking at this. And I would just ask and get your viewpoint on this. Given the backdrop for business at the moment, do you believe that the Minister is aware, is speaking to business to try to address their overriding concerns on the bill? And if that required further time for engagement, is this at all costs, this must be delivered in this mandate? Or is it a case of, I understand this is a seismic change that I'm suggesting, and I need to ensure that all players around the table, not everybody will always buy into this, that's absolutely right, but given the huge scope of potential change, that you bring as many along the road as possible?
I think that if we don't do things because we have to wait until everybody knows and everybody agrees, we probably wouldn't get a whole lot done.
Yeah.
And saying that, and I have been, genuinely have been engaging with business lobbies and individual businesses, and I do understand their apprehension. And I think that as you speak to them and engage with them, and similarly as this, gets to the executive and hopefully into the floor of the Assembly, this will become more known. And I think this, that's also, in fairness, the job of lots of MLAs to be able to explain these things as well if they're taking that forward. So I don't think that explanation piece solely sits with the Department for Economy. But what I would... Sorry,
I know we're brief. Just if you want to close on, then I'll one final one to you.
Yeah. But I would say is that we need to think about how... Nobody would say Northern Ireland's economy is, performing stellar. And I think what we need to do is to look at ways in which we can deliver, improve productivity. And there's multiple different ways that I have been... and through my advice to the department saying how do you improve productivity. One is through getting more of those productivity enhancing sectors in your economy. More of those great things will increase the size of the pie or whatever. But part of the good jobs agenda and how it links into the productivity agenda is making existing jobs better. And you can do that, and the research evidence presented within here makes clear that a trade union voice and representation has positive effects across the other dimensions of the Carnegie framework. And I think we need to try, I would say that I'm an academic, move forward on the basis of the evidence and to seek to bring coordination and to develop that.
I suppose a lot of the business experience, and I'm not for women in suggesting that you would never bring anything forward unless you had total buy-in from everybody, and I don't want it to be characterised as that. What I'm saying is that overwhelmingly I'm hearing concern from industry about what these changes would mean, and for them it is largely about the productivity issue and about how they could perhaps be bringing and inviting in disruption into their workplace rather than the harmonious relationships that many of them have. The last point for me would be you've talked extensively about New Zealand, and that is interesting, and I think the committee could do more to explore that particular aspect, because I would like to know, even the lead-in time with the Australian model, what was the forms of consultation, what was business's reaction to it, how has their fears, anxieties been offset by the legislation, is there still current fears and anxiety about how it affected productivity or relationships, and also how government prepared for such change, because that's the example that you're citing, and I think there's much more probably interest that we need to take up in exploring that going forward.
And the New Zealand model, they very much took their legislation as the first act in terms of prompting the direction of travel, and utilised the legislation as the prompting principle to move forward.
Do you have any idea of timeframes on that? So how long was this in the process with the New Zealand Parliament when it was passed? Do you have any?
I think it was about a year and a half. It wasn't actually very long because the Employment Contracts Act ran from 91 to 2000. And as far as I can remember, I think it was 98 there was a change of government, and then this was brought forward, and then it was legislated within 2 years. Because, I think it came in actually towards the end of 99. I could be wrong in trying to remember that, but I genuinely think that. But right, and I, both because the department has, because I had arranged an engagement session for the minister and also for the stakeholders of the of the LRA engagement forum to hear from New Zealand, from business leader in New Zealand, from the trade union leader, and from their industrial court CEO. It's a kind of equivalent between industrial court and LRA combination, and to talk through basically the whole process. They have a transcript of that initial session. Then following that, I done another session which is recorded. So the department also have that and probably could share it with the committee in terms of, and this was developed ahead of the Mid-Ulster event. It was cut significantly down, but the full piece will be there. And I think that's really informative in telling you through the whole process of how it works in New Zealand, and to hear from businesses, because my engagement with New Zealand was initially with the business leader there, because I wanted to understand that exact thing, was the same fears being talked about. The three of them say yes, the very same fears as that we were here in terms of replication of the worries. Those 5 areas that I outlined were there, and it has only been through building trust that it has happened. They didn't do a whole education program. They said they let it land, and then they took a very. It was all about based on the concept of reasonableness. Is it and enacted, and it has led to complete change in the system of industrial relations there, where there is positive relations between both parties and with the state. The New Zealand 3 also had said that, because I had said, perhaps the committee might want to engage with you, and they had said they'd also give live evidence or whatever. So I think that very much would be worth your while.
Okay, colleagues, can I, on behalf of the committee, thank Dr. Wilson for her research, which we were here to discuss today, but more importantly for the work that you have done and you'll continue to do. You'll be very busy, no doubt, so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Your voice held up well.
Yeah.
3 weeks now.
I've heard of it too.
Yesterday it was Naomi, today it's me.
Well, I was half an hour late, so.
Yeah. Okay, colleagues, is there anything that people want to follow up at this?
Many of them do.
No? Okay. With that then, colleagues, we'll adjourn and then open our tour after this, so the committee will now adjourn. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay, thanks, members. So